Welcome, everybody. Excited to talk to you today. I have a really good, really personal skill session for you because it's something that I spend time on every single day. And now I'm teaching it. So let's jump right into it. Let me share my screen. All right. Oh, and most exciting because first time I have the new branding on this session. So red and black is gone, green and gold is in. All right, everybody can see this, hopefully. Yes, thumbs up. Good. Looks good. Okay, great. So let's start here. The more clicks your newsletter gets, the more valuable it is. This is something I firmly believe. And as Louis Nichols, founder of Sparkleap, which is a great tool for promoting and growing your newsletter, said, for the interested, my newsletter is totally the goat of driving clicks and results. I'm able to drive a lot of clicks. It leads to a lot of results. It leads to clients. It leads to revenue. It leads to all sorts of things. So what I'm going to take you through today, this session is called the Micro Newsletter Creator. And basically, I'm going to show you how to publish a one-paragraph newsletter that earns you clients and revenue based on how I have been doing it for several years. I want to say up front that this is not the only way to write a newsletter. You can have lots of success with newsletters in all sorts of different formats. I'm not even necessarily saying that you need to do it this way. This is what I have chosen to do, and I'm going to explain to you a lot of the reasons. And I think there are a lot of benefits to this approach for certain types of people. And I would also add that even if you don't choose this format, because this format is highly click driven, you're going to learn a lot about how to get more engagement and more clicks on your content and your newsletter, even if you do a longer newsletter format. So I think there's going to be something here for you, even if you don't do this specific format. So before we begin, a few things here, right? So the first is every newsletter quote unquote rule applies, right? So all the general things about providing value and having a specific audience and all that kind of stuff applies. Just because it's a shorter newsletter doesn't mean that stuff goes out the window. Now, I put rule in quotation marks because even though there are rules, I don't actually think there are any rules. A newsletter can be whatever you want it to be. But just know that just because we're doing a short newsletter doesn't mean that you can ignore things like providing value to people, things like being consistent, all that stuff. The second thing before we begin here is a micro newsletter is really basic. As you're going to see, most of you, I assume, get my newsletter. If you don't, you certainly should. You can sign up at fortheinterested.com/subscribe. It looks incredibly basic, but the truth is that basicness and that simplicity is really valuable. It's way more valuable than it looks. And then the third point here is because it looks so basic and so simple, you're going to look at it. And even as I sort of talk about some of this stuff, it's going to seem like, oh, this seems really easy. But the truth is, like a lot of things, there's a lot going on behind it. It's harder than it looks. Doesn't mean that you can't do it. And I'm going to help you show you how to do it today. But I think it's, it can be tempting to sort of look at it and go like, well, I don't get it. He's writing a sentence or two. Like, what's so hard about that? Or what's the big deal? Or how does this do anything? There's a lot of layers behind it that I will hopefully help shine a light on today. And, as far as that concept, this is a quote that I love from Blaise Pascal, who's an old legendary mathematician and philosopher. And he said, I would have written a shorter letter, but I did not have the time. And it's interesting because as I've seen lots of people try to sort of mimic this micro newsletter format, some of them are good, a lot of them are not good. And I think a lot of them are not good because they don't realize that, like I said, it's harder than it might seem. So for the session today, I have a really simple agenda. So I'm going to take you through what is a micro newsletter, at least my definition of it. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why you might want to write one, either start a new one or adapt your current format. Or as you'll see me talk about, potentially use it in addition to your current format. I'm going to give you some suggestions and tips on how to actually write one, and then talk a little bit about how to grow and monetize it. I'll warn you up front in that growth section. I've done several other skill sessions that are deep dives into newsletter growth. So some of that is going to be recommendations that you go watch those because those are going to be much deeper than we're going to get today. Although I do have some suggestions for you today. So let's start with what is a micro newsletter. My definition is that a micro newsletter is a newsletter optimized for value per minute invested. Now, while I'm going to show you my format is, again, by no means the only format in which you can do this, but I think the key takeaway as you think about it is, how do I create something that, like I said, is optimized for the most value per minute invested? And I mean value per minute invested both for the reader and for the creator. So the nice thing about a micro newsletter is it should not take readers long to consume, and it should not take the creators long to create. And both of those things unlock all sorts of additional value. So I figured I should start with sort of the origin of my micro newsletter. So I have been publishing it daily since 2001. So a little over 3 years at this point. And it really started as an experiment that became a side project that became the main format of my newsletter and has now attracted 32,000 subscribers. It's gotten me hundreds of clients over the years. My newsletter is the engine of my entire business and has generated over 6 figures in sponsorship revenue. So it all started at a time where I was working with clients and I've been a huge proponent of newsletters and telling everyone, you should have a newsletter, you should have a newsletter, you should have a newsletter. And some people would come back at me and they would say like, okay, I get it, but it feels like a lot of work. It seems like a lot of work. I don't have time to do that. I'm not really a writer, all this stuff. And I wound up saying the same thing to them over and over again. I would sort of say like, look, a newsletter is just a value delivery mechanism. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be what you think of a newsletter to be. It doesn't even have to be like originally written stuff. You can curate links to things that you find interesting and all that kind of stuff. And this image here is of a comedian who I was working with at the time named Joe Sib. And I was having this conversation with him and he had a pretty big following. He was posting on Instagram all the time and he was doing all these platforms. And he actually had a background. He had run a record label, actually. He came out of the music industry and then sort of later in life got into comedy. But in my conversation with him, I remember specifically talking to him and I remember saying, he was kind of giving me all those things about like, I don't know about a newsletter. And I said, look, all you have to do, you need an email list, right? Especially as a comedian, like you need to grow your email list. You need a direct connection to your audience. You have this big following on Instagram and you can't reach them half the time because of the algorithms and all that. I was like, all you need to do is send an email once a week and share one thing that either you created or you found that you find funny or interesting or valuable, whatever, to your people. Even if you're just sharing that, he was posting daily on Instagram, really good stuff. And I was like, even if you just pick the best one of those each week and email it to people, it'll give you value. And with him and with other people, I found myself repeatedly saying like, if you sent one sentence and that sentence was valuable or had a link, people would love it. And they would love it in part because it was so short. And after saying that over and over again, I realized, I had a longer form newsletter, basically what my Sunday newsletter is now. And I was like, you know what? I really believe this, but I don't know that it's actually true. I haven't actually tested it. Like I should probably test it. So I decided to do a 1-month experiment and I launched a separate newsletter. This is the side project part, right? And I called it the Daily Graph. And instead of limiting myself to one sentence, I limited myself to one paragraph. And I emailed my whole list and I said, hey, you know what? I'm going to do this little side project. I'm going to send one paragraph a day at most. And do you want to check it out? And at the time, I think I had maybe 20,000 subscribers. And maybe initially 500 or so, maybe 1,000 signed up for this little experiment. And I started doing it. And I started realizing, at like most things, it developed as I went, but very quickly, I realized a few things. Number one, I realized people loved it. The people that signed up for it, the open rates were higher, the click rates were way higher. The feedback was amazing. And they were like, I'm opening this and reading it every day because I know when I open it, it's a ridiculously short commitment. I'll read your thing. I'll see the link. If I'm interested in it, I'll click it. And if not, I won't. And at the same time, I had people reading my Sunday newsletter who were like, I love your Sunday newsletter and it shares, it had 10 links and whatever, but like, it's kind of overwhelming. And sometimes I don't open it because I'm going to open it later because I don't have time right now in the moment. So very quickly, I realized like, okay, this format works and people really like it. And I was having fun with it because it was super quick to write. Like literally I could do it in like 5 minutes. And what I realized was I could even take the kind of stuff, the kind of links that I would want to share on social media, but couldn't because no one would see them because the algorithms hate links. I could put in this newsletter and it would work. And so very quickly I was like, okay, this is working for me. This is working for other people. And over the course of a couple months, I kept promoting it in my main newsletter and got to a point where, I had maybe 2,000 people getting this Daily Graph and then maybe 20,000 people getting my main newsletter. And I became so confident in it that I realized, like, you know what? All these, as opposed to me trying to convince people to subscribe to this, I'm just going to make it, I can flip a switch and make it part of my main newsletter and let people opt out as opposed to opting in. So I told everybody moving forward, you're going to get this daily one. If you don't want it, just let me know. And then you'll only get the weekly one. And out of 20,000 people, maybe 150 or 200 people did that. Suddenly, 20,000 people were getting this daily micro newsletter, and the clicks were massive. I was getting more clicks on one link in my daily micro newsletter than I was in like 15 links combined in my Sunday newsletter. And so I realized it clicked, and then we'll get into sort of monetization later, but that's sort of where it started. My newsletter became this micro weekday newsletter, and then I still send a Sunday edition. And then the next big thing I realized was like, oh my God, like if they're clicking this many links, I could add one ad in the same format, and the ad clicks were huge. And that basically really built and catapulted my whole ad business. But we'll get to all that. So the format I use, which again, most of you hopefully get my newsletter, so you're familiar with this, it's evolved over time. Originally, it was just one thing in an ad. I've now added a sort of second item. So most days, the first thing is a link to something that I created. The second thing is the sponsored link or a promotional link if I want to promote something. And then the third link is usually something curated, something I found from someone else. I don't label it as such, and it doesn't always follow this format, but that's typically what I do. And I have a big library of content to pull from, and I'm creating new stuff all the time. So I usually have something new to put in that top spot. And again, that's sort of how I approach it. Again, with everything I'm telling you, there are other ways to do it. This is not like the only way to do it, but this is what I do. And along the lines of that flexibility, it's really important, I think, for me to say, like, your micro newsletter can be whatever you want it to be, right? So you can choose whatever format you want. You can send it whatever frequency you want. It doesn't have to be daily. It doesn't have to be weekly. You can do whatever you want. You can mix and match, right? You can send like I do, on weekdays, I send this micro format. On Sundays, I send a longer format. So you could do that. Maybe if you currently have a newsletter that you send once every 2 weeks, maybe you could go weekly and just have every other week be this micro format, which would not be a lot of additional work, but would get you sort of additional frequency. And then, like I said before, this won't be for everyone. Like, I'm not saying you need to use this format or have a micro newsletter. I have found that lots of readers love it. I'm sure there's some readers that don't like it and they want more. There's some writers that won't like writing in this way and they want to do more. That's fine. Like you do whatever you want to do. I'm just showing you what has worked for me. And I'm not the only one that this is working for, right? I'm seeing more and more of these, what I call micro newsletters, and more people sort of using this format. Just a couple examples on the left-hand side is Minimalist Hustler Daily. Jamie, I don't know if he's on, but I'm sure will watch this at some point. He is a member here and has been for a long time. His newsletter, he will say, was very inspired by mine. You can see he shares something from him, something from someone else, and then something from one of his sponsors. That's going to look very familiar. He's had a lot of success with it. You can see it's his 994th. On the top right is a relatively new micro newsletter that I am a big fan of. Comes from Matt Ruby, who is a comedian and a writer, and it's called Working Matters. And what he's doing is he's basically taking creative people and artists and sort of sharing one bit of tip, something about their process in a very short form micro newsletter, usually like a quick excerpt like you see there from Jim Henson and then a link. And then the other thing is, this is not necessarily a new concept. On the bottom right is an example from Seth Godin's blog. Seth Godin has been blogging every day forever. And, while he's not doing links, he's basically, most of his blog posts are very short. Like that's an entire one right there. So that's really a micro newsletter that he's just posting on a blog, and you can subscribe and get it by email as well. So again, I didn't invent this necessarily, but it's a thing that's been around and lots of people are doing, and I see more and more people doing it all the time. Okay. So now that we have some idea of what a micro newsletter is, let's talk about why you might actually want to write one. Again, starting one from scratch, shifting yours to this format, or doing it in addition to your current one. So the first thing here is why, to have a newsletter in general, if you want clients, I'm a firm believer that you should have a newsletter. It's the strongest connection you can have to them. A good newsletter done well and done strategically will attract your ideal clients. It will help you build relationships with them. Again, the frequency of that a micro newsletter allows also strengthens those relationships. It's an easy way to provide free value to people, and it helps you learn, right? It becomes a forcing function. If like any newsletter, if you have to come up with stuff to share, well, it forces you to be learning new things and creating new things, and all of that has a good impact. Like I said, a newsletter is the strongest connection you can have to an audience. It's algorithm proof. You're going to reach way more people than you will through organic social, or a way higher percentage of your audience. So I'm going to dive into these a little deeper, but here are here's an overview of kind of 10 reasons why you might want to write a micro newsletter. Number one, like I said, because it's so short, it's really quick and easy to create. Because it's quick and easy to create, it allows you to have an increased frequency. There's no way I would have a daily newsletter in a different format. Would be way too much work and way too much overwhelming. But in this format, it actually makes it relatively easy for me to do daily. And that creates a tighter relationship with my audience. It drives more traffic. I'll get into this, but I have found, like I mentioned before, that the micro newsletter format generates way more clicks than a typical longer newsletter. Because you can generate more clicks, it allows you to capture super valuable data about who is clicking what. It forces focus. So one of the things that's interesting is, like, if I'm only going to share one thing or two things, I have to figure out, well, what are the best one or two things of the 10 things that I want to share? And so that reduction leads to more quality, higher quality often. You'll get more signups and opens. I have found in general that this micro newsletter format, again, people open it because they know it's going to be a quick read. And I actually, on my sign up page, say it's a 1-paragraph newsletter, which I believe, I don't have full data on this, but I believe anecdotally that it leads people to be more likely to sign up because they're curious, and they also know that, like, oh, this is just going to be a quick read. And what does a 1-paragraph newsletter look like? Like I said, you can do it daily. I think it's almost impossible to do a daily newsletter that is in a longer format. It's very easy to experiment with because it's so short. So you can test different formats, you can test different links, all that kind of stuff. It can work for any niche. And if you are posting on social at all, especially on LinkedIn or Twitter or any place, even Instagram or anything where you're, for that matter, even if you're doing videos, you're already creating this content. So your micro newsletter could be as simple as taking the things that you're posting on social and sending them in an email, right? So you may not even need to create additional content to have a micro newsletter. So let's dive deeper into some of these things. So like I said, you'll get more attention. I believe you're going to get more signups and opens. That has been my experience. I also believe you're going to get fewer unsubscribes because it's going to be higher quality and quicker, and it doesn't, it doesn't drain people in the same way. You're going to get more clicks, and that's really important because traffic creates all sorts of opportunities, right? It creates opportunities for sponsorships. It creates opportunities for cross promotions because you're able to drive more people to someone who can then drive people back to you. Creates opportunities for partnerships. The ability to drive traffic is super valuable in all sorts of ways. So to give you an idea of how different it is, I looked at some recent issues of my daily newsletter and then some recent issues of my Sunday newsletter, which is a longer newsletter, and they feature completely different content, by the way. So I looked at sort of average clicks on kind of top performing stuff, like the top 5 links, I think, in each Sunday newsletter versus the links that are in the daily newsletter. Those links in the daily newsletter are more than double the average click number of what I get in a Sunday newsletter, right? It is, and this is the exact same audience, right? That is a massive difference in terms of the ability to drive clicks and traffic. Again, 114% difference between the micro newsletter and my longer newsletter. And by the way, those are individual link numbers. That's not total numbers. So you'll get more data, right? If you're getting more clicks, you're getting more data. This is why, even if you're going to write and create long form content, which, by the way, I do, I have podcasts and videos that are an hour long. I have blog posts that are really long. A micro newsletter is a better delivery mechanism for it, right? If I write a long blog post, I don't need to put that whole long blog post in the newsletter. I can just write a quick teaser for it and get people to click, which is going to show me who is actually interested in, who actually read it. As opposed to when you put the full content in the newsletter, all you know is who opened it. Maybe you don't know if they actually read it or were interested or not. Link clicks are super valuable. right? Because of that, because they tell you not just did your audience open it, but who did they read it? Were they interested enough to click? And more importantly, who did, right? So knowing who clicked what is super valuable if you're strategic about the content that you use, right? So for example, on the right-hand side, this is a recent issue of my newsletter. The subject line was if you want to build recurring revenue, and then it was make sure your product does the 5 things I mentioned in this 4-minute video. Well, what that tells me, the only person that's going to click that is someone that's interested in building recurring revenue. So if I have a product or a service or other content or anything that's targeted at people who want to build recurring revenue, I just had my entire audience, basically the people interested in that, the leads, raise their hand by clicking this link, and I can see who they are. If I don't use the link, I can't see that. I know who opened it. Maybe I don't know if they read it. I don't know any of that other stuff. So knowing who is clicking specific things in your newsletter creates all kinds of opportunities for you to then reach out to them, remarket to them, and even figure out like, well, how much does your audience even care about this angle? So just to give you an idea, this is a complete hypothetical, but like if you have 500 newsletter subscribers and you place a link in your thing that's about a topic related to the service you provide, and 10% of them click that, that's 50 quality lead, right? So if you use a different newsletter format, even a longer newsletter format where let's say you get 2%, you're getting 10 leads, right? Is a massive difference. And so when you start to realize like, if I have 500 subscribers and I can get 10% of them to click something that is the equivalent of a hand raise, that gives me 50 people to follow up with and target, right? It's super, super powerful. And again, that's why I love this, especially if you're trying to get clients and customers and that kind of. So the other thing is you'll get more love. I have found again that people, at least my audience, loves this format. And I think there are several reasons for that. I think one is it shows that you respect people's time. And I think that it sets you up for when they assume, like when they see my newsletter, they assume that like, okay, well, if I work with him, he's not going to just sort of drag out working with me. Like he's going to, just like his newsletter, he's going to get to the point and try to help me as quickly as possible. I also think now in a world of infinite feeds everywhere, people really like to be able to finish things. Like the idea that they can open an email, look at it, and in, less than a minute in most cases, feel that, get that dopamine rush of like, oh, I finished that. I can delete that email. I read it. It's not just sitting in my inbox. The other thing is most people, even though lots of people are doing this format, most people are not. So you'll stand out from the crowd and it's unique. And it also proves that you can provide quick value. If you can write in this format and give people value on a consistent basis, that does wonders for your brand because they're like, wow, like, this guy sends me an email and it's 3 sentences and I love it. Like what would happen if I got an hour of his time? So that's why it's great for you as the creator, but is it really better for readers? And to me, the answer is clearly yes. Because first of all, they get every benefit they get from a bigger newsletter, assuming it was a good one, but they get it in less time. The second thing is, if you're assuming you're providing and creating good content, all this stuff you're posting on social, like most of your audience isn't seeing it because of the algorithms, right? So this is a way for them to see all the stuff and all the value that you're providing that they otherwise would have missed. And then the third thing is you have the potential to drive traffic to them, to feature that, when I I can put a link in my newsletter and send people at times thousands of visitors, even on a micro level, right? If you can send someone, 50 people, if 50 people click something and you drive them to their social post or their whatever, that is super powerful and valuable and generous and all of that. So I'm able to drive people to my clients. I'm able to drive people to partners or anyone that I just have an exchange with and want to help out. And again, this goes back to that idea that like the more clicks you're able to drive, the more value it creates for everyone. So let's get into some sort of nuts and bolts of how to write a micro newsletter. So really simply, it was funny when I was thinking about this because it is so basic. I was like, well, what am I going to tell people about like how to write this thing? Like there's not that much to it. But then I started thinking about it and I was like, oh, you know what? There's more than it seems. And I realized the first thing is like when I sit down to write my newsletter, I realize I only need 3 things to happen. I need to get people to open the email. I need to get them to click a link that I've shared. And that link that they click needs to reveal something so valuable that they're more likely to do it again tomorrow. Really basic. Not necessarily easy to do, but now I go, okay, how am I going to get them to open it? How am I going to get them to click it? And how am I going to make sure that whatever they're clicking is super valuable and they're going to want to do it tomorrow? So in order to do that, here's what I need to do, right? I need to write copy that makes them curious enough to open and click. Curiosity is the key here to all of it. Very different than other longer newsletters, right? I need to drive them to something that satisfies that curiosity, right? So I need to make sure I'm finding something good enough that can live up to sort of the curiosity that I've created in my copy. And then I need to do it again tomorrow, right? I need to, and again, it doesn't have to be daily. It can be next week, whatever your frequency is. But for me, it's daily. So it means I got to do it again and again and again. So there's a really interesting video, and I'm going to show the link on the next page. So Dao Yen, I think has how you pronounce it. He gave a TED talk in 2018, kind of at peak BuzzFeed era. And she was the publisher. And she's talking about how to go viral, but she really talks about how they think about content and what they've learned. And she said, don't just think about the subject matter, think primarily about the job your content is doing for the reader. And I'll give you a link to the video and you can go watch it. And she's going to explain it much better than me. But they called it, I think, cultural cartography. And they mapped all these reasons why people click and share things, right? And there's a variety of reasons in it. And it's about sort of what it does for them. And then they use that to create curiosity in all their headlines and content. So I'm not going to talk through this, but I do recommend you go check that out. You can find it on YouTube. We'll drop a link in the chat. The name of the video is What Makes Something Go Viral. It's on the TED Talks channel, and there's a link there. So that aside, like, how do you figure out what you should share in your micro newsletter? So like always, I always start with specific value for a specific audience. You need to be clear on who you're trying to serve, how you're trying to help them, and how you're trying to help, what transformation you're trying to help them make. All the content you choose to share should be aligned with that. Depending on what you do, you can have a micro newsletter that only features original content, meaning you're only linking to your own stuff that you've created or only talking about your own stuff that you've created. It can be curated where it's no original stuff and you're just showing the best stuff that you found elsewhere. Or what my preference is with most things is a hybrid approach where some of your stuff is original, some of your stuff is curated. I like a hybrid approach because I think ultimately, especially if you're trying to get clients and customers, they need to buy from you, which means they need to know that you have expertise. So you need some original stuff. But I like hybrid because adding in curated is just a simple way to make it much more valuable because you don't have to create every single thing yourself. You just have to also find really good stuff. I'm also a big fan of sharing actionable content. So what I ask myself with just about everything I share is what can someone do after they consume this, right? If there's nothing they can do, then it's probably not actually valuable. It just might be interesting. So once in a while, I'll share something that's just interesting, but in general, I'm always optimizing for what can I give someone that after they see this thing, after they consume it, they can do something that they couldn't do before. I've done a whole skill session on how to find content to share. So I'm not going to go too much deeper into this here, but I recommend you go watch the Content Compass session. It is in the archives and we'll drop a link in the chat to that as well. So I want to talk a little bit about how I actually track content. So what I do is throughout the week, I subscribe to a lot of newsletters. I'm on, scrolling my Twitter and LinkedIn feed. I follow smart people, and anytime I come across anything that I'm going to want to share, I use Workflowy, which is what you're seeing on the right. It's a very simple sort of like nested bullet point list, and I'll just drop a link in there, right? Then I'll go through what you're not seeing. This is sort of mapped out for the week, but I have a long list of just sort of links I'm going to share. And then at the beginning of each week, I just drop out, okay, I drop in whatever I want to share on Monday and what I want to share on Tuesday and what I want to share on Wednesday, et cetera, right? I have separate sort of workflowy threads for my daily newsletter, for my weekly newsletter, and I even have one for social posts that I want to repurpose or post or whatever. We're going to talk about social in a minute because I think that's another sort of key piece of a micro newsletter. I also, I've been doing this for 8 years, so I have a ton of content that I've created and curated over the years. So I have a whole, which I'm going to show you in a second, spreadsheet where I track content that I want to repurpose and post again. That's also the advantage of evergreen content. I don't share quote unquote news in my newsletter. I share stuff that is going to be just as valuable years from now as it is today for the most part, which allows me to do this. So this is a glimpse at sort of my repurposing spreadsheet. So on the left-hand side is the issue number. That's the issue of my Sunday newsletters, right? So I go through and I go through and I look at like, is there anything that I think I would still want to share? That's the headline. You'll see some of them are links to things that I've created. The original column is me saying, yes, this is something of mine, or no, this is something someone else created. And then I just write down the repost date when I basically shared it in my daily newsletter. So you will see, even just from this glimpse, a lot of, at this point, I've been doing it a long time. A lot of what I'm sharing in my daily micro newsletter is stuff that I have shared before, right? I have shared it on social. I've shared it in my newsletter. It may have been years, like, for example, that top one. So that was a blog post I wrote years ago. I shared it in issue 120 of my newsletter. By the way, I'm on issue 440 now. So that's 300 plus weeks ago. I shared it in my newsletter. And now I just shared it again on July 28th in my daily newsletter. Right. So when you start, and again, I've done this for a long time, so I have a lot of stuff, but you can, if you start, you could go back to your things that you've shared on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever, a newsletter, if you have one, and just use all of that content to repost it in your micro newsletter over time. I have never had a single person say, why are you sharing this again? Or remember it. And to be perfectly honest, when I pull this stuff, most of the time, I don't even remember that I shared it before. And I don't even remember that I created it before. So if I don't remember it, my audience certainly doesn't remember it. So some writing tips, once you've sort of found your content, how do you write this in a way that works well and again is going to perform well? So again, unlike a lot of stuff here, the goal is the click, right? So when I'm writing this micro newsletter, I'm not trying to summarize stuff. I'm just trying to make people curious and get them to click. The subject line, a lot of times I think of as the setup and the copy is the punchline. So you saw that in one of the examples I showed before, and I'll show another example in a second, but like subject line setup, copy is the punchline. I want to talk about clickbait really quickly because clickbait gets a bad rap. It's only clickbait if it doesn't live up to the promise. If it lives up to the promise, it's just great copy, right? So you actually want to write clickbaity type headlines and type copy. You just don't want to mislead people, right? That's when it's a bad thing. Right? I want to write it in a way that's going to get as many people as possible to click it. But once they do, it has to live up to that promise. Otherwise, the whole thing falls apart and they're not going to click again. If it does live up to that promise, again, they're going to be more likely to click the next time. So here's a couple examples of stuff that performed well for me. So this is an example of sort of subject line setup. And then when I say copy, that was the first line in the newsletter, right? So the subject line was want to identify your unique superpower. Perfect example of trying to create curiosity. And then they opened the email and said, use the template I share in this 1-minute video to figure it out. Setup, punchline. On a standalone line, right? Use the template I share in this 1-minute video to figure it out. That makes no sense without the subject line. What most people will do is they would overwrite this. So even if they use that headline, they would say, want to identify, or subject line, they'd say, want to identify your unique superpower. And then they would start as if the subject line didn't exist. They would say, oh, maybe you want to know what your superpower is. And I created this template, and all that does is add length. You don't need it. Subject line is like the first line, and then you go right into the sort of punchline. Another thing I would point out here is the underlined text, the fact that I say it's a 1-minute video. If I just say this video, some people are not going to click it because they think, oh, it might be long. The fact that I say anytime, if you have a short time, and I'll talk about this in a second, but if you're going to share a video or a piece of content or something that is short, reference how short it is. It makes people more likely to click. Here's another example of this was just a copy line in my newsletter that drove a lot of clicks. I promise your life and work will improve when you stop using this word. I don't tell them what the word is because I'm driving curiosity, right? The word, by the way, was should. But if I say, I promise your life and work will improve when you stop using the word should, the number of people that are going to click that is going to go way down, right? This is a clickbaity title, but it's not misleading because when they get there, they're going to get an article about how their life will improve when they stop using the word should, right? I'm holding something back because my goal is clicks and curiosity and then delivering on it. So with that in mind, when you're writing these, another way to think about it is you're writing to tease people, not summarize. So you will be tempted to summarize. I was. We're so used to doing that, even when you write short, right? I'm linking to something. My job is to sort of do a quick summary of what it is. But the truth is that when you summarize what it is, all you're doing is reducing the curiosity. All you're doing is reducing the chance that they're going to click it and actually go read it, right? So when I'm writing these, I'm thinking to myself, how little do I have to say to create curiosity? Not how can I summarize this thing concisely, right? But how can I tease them just enough to make them want to click it, right? Again, it will improve when you stop using this word. It creates what they call a curiosity gap. And psychologically, you're like, I need to know what the word is. Very tough not to click that, right? And this happens all over the place, right? So, there's another snippet here where I had written something about, check out the 4 sections you need on your about page. Well, I could have said you need a value prop on your about page. You're more likely to click because you want to know what the 4 sections are. If I tell you what it is, if I tell you what even one of them are up front, you're less likely, right? And again, I know some people may be like, oh, this feels, clickbaity or whatever, but like, as long as they go to that page and they get the 4 sections and it's good, this is the key, right? You got to share good, valuable stuff. No one's going to have a problem with it, right? They love it. Again, and every time it pays off, it makes them want to do it again. If you share a video, one of the things I've gotten feedback for, I didn't do this originally. I got feedback from people who were like, oh, it'd be really nice if you would tell us when it's a video. I didn't used to do that at all, right? Because I thought, some people might not click it, whatever. Now, for the most part, I tell people when it's a video most of the time. I definitely tell them if it's a short video, right? If it's a video and I say, oh, watch this 30-second video, watch this 1-minute snippet, because I know telling them that makes them more likely to click and watch it. Whereas if it's a 50-minute video, I'd probably just say, go watch this video, right? Because if they hear 50 minutes, they're going to be less likely to check it out. Again, all I'm trying to do is get them to the place to see the thing and have it pay off. A few quick things about social media and how it relates to all of this. So like I mentioned before, if you're posting on a social platform, you are already writing a micro newsletter. You're just not distributing it. So I feel like anyone who is actively posting on any social media platform at a minimum should be doing this, because you can think of it as just another distribution channel for the content you're creating on the social platforms. The other thing is you have the ability to drive people into those posts, which is going to help them in the algorithm, help with more engagement, and help you get more reach on the social platforms itself, right? So I can sort of boost my own posts on social platforms by using my newsletters, send a bunch of people to them. The next thing here is post in your micro newsletter what you wish your social followers would actually see. So those posts you have that you're like, oh, this is so good and nobody's seeing it. Well, it's like nobody's seeing it because the algorithm didn't show it to them. So here's another opportunity for you to get it to people. And this is especially true with links and content because, as we know, social platforms really restrict the reach of links. And then the last thing here is I will often share links to my own social posts in my micro newsletter or other social posts. Don't embed them. That's a huge mistake, because when you embed them, people don't engage with them. They don't they just read them and they don't do anything else. And when you send them, when you link to them, you're driving people into the platforms where it's easy for them to like or reply to your post. It's easy for them to follow you. The algorithm then knows that more people are reading it and consuming it. It unlocks all sorts of good things. Like, even if you don't do a micro newsletter, like the worst thing you can do is embed a tweet or embed social content within your newsletter where you don't get any of those benefits. Always link straight to the post itself. Drive people into those platforms. They love that. And then a few things here that I know I'll get asked, and stuff that, to be honest, doesn't really matter. What platform for you? You can do this on anything. I use ConvertKit and I'm a fan of ConvertKit, but you can use Substack, you can use Beehive, you can use MailChimp. It doesn't matter. You can do this on any platform, really. Your existing audience size also doesn't really matter. Obviously, the more people you have, the better, the more, whatever, but you can be starting from scratch and it's fine. Another nice thing is, even if you're starting from scratch, number one, you'll get in the habit of doing this. You'll learn a ton. You can also repurpose all this stuff as social posts if you want. So it can go both ways. I wouldn't feel like, oh, I need an existing audience to do this. The length doesn't really matter, right? I do a sentence, a couple, or 3 sort of sections. You could do one section. If you want to do a little longer, you could do a little longer. The basic principles, again, is it coming back to that sort of optimizing for value per minute invested for both you and the readers. And then images. I don't use any images. You could. It's not the end of the world. I don't necessarily recommend them, but again, it takes you more time to find them or create them or whatever, but it certainly doesn't mean that you can't use them. All right. So you've got a micro newsletter, you're up and running, you figured out how to write it. It's opening doors for you, and just want to talk a little bit about growing and modeling. So again, I'm not going to dive deep into the growth stuff because I've done 3 sessions that are deep dives into this, and all the stuff I talked about there applies. So you can see it in the archives. It's the newsletter booster, which shows you how to grow your newsletter in 5 minutes a day. The newsletter social playbook, which shows you how to use social media to grow your newsletter and vice versa. And then the subscriber to customer converter talks about how you can turn newsletter subscribers into customers and clients. You can get them all at the link there, and we'll drop it in the chat as well. I do want to talk for a second about ads. So if you're going to run ads and sponsorships, and Emily can drop a link in the chat. I don't think I put the link here. I have a podcast episode that I did a couple of years ago where I talk all about how I launched my ads and approached the ads in my newsletter. So that's worth listening to for a deep dive on this. But here's some general notes. Number 1, don't make them look like ads. I have actually tested this. I had a micro newsletter, and then I had a sponsor like do a full on like image, whatever, and it was terrible. And people were like, what is that? Like, if it's a micro newsletter, it should have micro ads, right? It should not have sort of big ad spots. When you run the ad, this is my own personal take, and I have found works well, even though it's completely counterintuitive. Brand name optional. My ads, for the most part, do not mention the brand that is the sponsor. I know that seems insane, but that's what I do. And again, it's because I do it for 2 reasons. They have no brand names and they have no brand images, right? And one of the biggest reasons why I do that is because, again, my goal is to play up the value of whatever's being sponsored, to get people curious and get them to click and go to the brand's or the sponsor's website. I believe strongly the best way to sell that brand is going to be in their environment. They have a sales page. They have a website. They have a whole thing that's going to present everything this person needs to know. My job is to get people who are interested in the value they have to present to go there into their universe. My job is not to sort of throw the brand name and have a sort of general awareness play. It's not an awareness play. It's a traffic play. Right. So I want people to be curious and go, well, what is this? What is this newsletter? What is this brand? What is this sponsor? Like, that curiosity is going to drive more people into their world, which is ultimately going to get them better results. And that was my theory. And that is exactly what has happened and why the ads have been so effective. This should be obvious, but unfortunately it's not. No boring copy. So in my weekday newsletters, I write the copy for all the ads. It's in my voice. And they perform much better than the Sunday ones where other people submit the copy. Also, because the micro newsletter in general drives more traffic. And everything that I just said also applies to affiliate links. So even if you're not going to get ads or sponsors, but you're going to do affiliate marketing and promote things as an affiliate, I would use the exact same approach and have on occasion. So here's an example. I want to give a couple examples of how I write the ads. So I usually always say today's email is brought to you by, and then have what the ad is. So in this example, today's email is brought to you by Must Read Newsletter if you have something to sell. Again, I'm going for curiosity. It's true. This actually goes to the Why We Buy newsletter by Caitlin Burgoyne, which is a must read newsletter if you have something to sell, right? But so my goal is not to say, I could say today's email is brought to you by Why We Buy by, Caitlin Burgoyne, whatever, but I'd rather have the curiosity. Let them click it, let them go in and let them go to her landing page, which is going to sell her newsletter much better than I am in a sentence. Here's another example. Today's email is brought to you by a social media tool you can try for free that makes content collaboration, editing, planning, and scheduling a breeze, right? This goes to a tool called Planable that was a sponsor of mine. I don't say Planable. I don't need to say Planable, right? If people are interested in this value, they're going to click and they're going to go. Another side note here is if you're promoting something that is free, it's always worth referencing that it's free, right? If I just say today's email is brought to you by a social media tool that makes blah, 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 some people won't click because they'll assume it's a paid product and they're not interested. But by adding that it's free, that's going to maximize the number of people that are curious to click and check it out. Okay, that was a lot. For a micro newsletter, turns out I had a lot of things to say. But so here's a simple way to start. If you're starting from scratch, here's what I would recommend as your first 5 steps. Pick a specific value you want to provide to a specific audience. It's always got to start there. Go find one amazing thing to send them. Something you've created, something you curate that you found, just something that you're like, I know that anyone that my audience that sees this, they're going to find it valuable. Tease on social media. If you use social media, that you're going to send it, right? So say, hey, I'm sending a special, 1 sentence, 1 paragraph email tomorrow, and it's going to feature blah, blah, blah. You don't say exactly what it is. You tease it and ask if people want it. Give them a sign up page or have them, give you their email or however you want to do it. Then step 4 is send it, analyze the results, and repeat. I guarantee you, even if you send it, if you do this to your existing list, I think you will be shocked to see how many more clicks and interaction you get. And if you do it from scratch, it's a great way to sort of get up and going. That's about it for this. One thing I would say is if you want help doing this or anything else, and you like the idea of me being your partner to help you create this stuff, shoot me an email and we can talk about it. And I'm happy to give you guidance, give you help, maybe give you some promotion if your audience is similar to the audience that I have. I've got a lot of different levers that I can pull to help you get where you want to go. So shoot me an email, let me know where you're trying to go, and we can talk about how I might be able to help. With that said, I am now happy to take any questions that anybody has.
Just got a question from Corey, and maybe you can explain about your process. Couldn't you do this as an evergreen newsletter versus your weekly real-time workflow?
100% you could. And I have thought about it at times. I just haven't done it, but you absolutely could. I have thought multiple times in the past that I could pick almost any niche I want and literally map out like a year's worth of this stuff and have it run on autopilot. Probably do it in a bunch of different niches and probably have it be a nice business. Everything takes time. It just hasn't been a priority to do it. But yes, you absolutely could do that.
No other questions in the chat. If anybody wants to raise their hand. Oh, MV just asked, how do you actually find these?
How do I find the stuff that I share?
Yes.
So you should watch the Content Compass because that's literally all about how I do it and different ways that you can do it. So depending on your niche, for me right now, the primary way I find stuff is I subscribe to a lot of newsletters, right, that are curating stuff. So I find stuff through there and I follow a lot of smart people that share good stuff on Twitter and LinkedIn. So that's the primary way I find it. But I have another client that I help with their newsletter and they actually are more sharing like topical news stuff. So that their stuff is almost all found, and it's actually in a niche that I know nothing about or have no personal experience with. So their stuff we find almost entirely from Google News searches, not Google search, but Google News searches, because we want topical stuff. So there's a bunch of different ways to do it. Also, if you're doing evergreen stuff, I don't do a lot of this. Once in a blue moon, I will, but you can go on things like, let's say, if you have a specific niche, you could go on Reddit, find subreddits about that niche, and you can search for like the top voted things in the last month, in the last year, in all time. Like the thing that's interesting is if you're playing in an arena with sort of timeless content, right? You can find content that's proven to work, right? So if I was, let's say I was in the gardening niche, right? I could go to Reddit's gardening subreddit. I could search by top voted links in, let's say, the last year. And the stuff that's at the top, like I know people loved and found valuable. Like it's guaranteed to work, right? So again, it depends a little what you're doing. There's a lot of different ways, but yeah, that for me right now, it's primarily newsletters, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and YouTube. Actually, I should add that YouTube.
Okay, we just got a flurry of questions. This is very exciting. Okay. Question from Temi. The resources you're linking to, like videos, web pages, take more time to read. How do you explain that to the readers?
They figure it out. I mean, like I said, with the video, sometimes I'll reference how long it is. Or sometimes if it's a long video, I might say, make sure you check out the 16-minute mark of this video. Sometimes I'll tip them off to sort of like the best part if they don't have a lot of time. Most of the stuff I'm linking to isn't that long necessarily, actually. And I'll add this, because in my newsletter, besides the ad, I have 2 different things that I'm linking to usually. I am conscious of if one of those things is a long video, I'm going to have the other one be a short piece of content. So I try to have a balance where it's like, okay, I didn't send them an email with 2 videos that are both an hour long and they have, like that's sort of overwhelming. I want at least something in there to be a sort of quick read, a quick whatever. But most people can kind of piece, they piece it together as they go, or they save it. So I'm not too worried about it. I'd say I'm most conscious of it in terms of not sending an email that only has long stuff. And I would also add, in most of my emails, I usually won't have both links be a video. So if one's a video, the other will be an article. I'll sort of mix it up that way.
Great. Sarah has a question if she wants to come off mute.
Hey, Josh. Thank you.
Hey, Sarah.
It was a bit complicated. So I have lots of things on Instagram that I could link in a newsletter, but the call to action on all my Instagram stuff is to join my newsletter. So I'm wondering, so if I send someone who's already on the newsletter back to a post and the call to action is to join my newsletter, they'll want it.
But that doesn't matter because because the content isn't that, right? The content is something that you're sharing, some bit of value, expertise, or whatever, and then the call to action at the end is to join the newsletter, right?
Yeah, I guess so. They're still saying the content.
Yeah.
Because I help menopausal women lose their weight and reduce their symptoms. And they're like a bit more, I feel they need a bit more nurturing. So I think you're just going to say, well, just try it. But
so
you get that this works for us and we're in business, we're all quick and ideas.
Well, I'm glad you brought this. I'm glad you brought this up because here's the thing. The thing that you're sending them to can have all the depth in the world.
Okay.
Right. So if you think about it, it's really just in a lot of ways, it's weird to say this, right? But it's like, I think it's almost like I even treat it as it's almost like newsletter as social platform, right?
Okay.
So it's like, I'm just using it as a way to get this great piece of content that can have all the depth you want and all to get it in front of you. Because on social, I can't really do that because I can't really post links and I can't whatever, right? Like I can write longer form, but that's all it is. It's this sort of bridge step, right? To get you to all the depth. So you're not actually it's micro just in terms of the way what's in the email. It's like the email is micro, but the content could be, so if I write a long blog post, here's what a lot of people do that I think is a mistake, right? They write a long blog post that has all the depth in the world. And they go, I'm going to send it to people as my newsletter. So they don't have to click anything and they can just read the whole thing and whatever, right? What I'm saying is, instead of doing that, just write a sentence or two and send them to the blog post for multiple reasons. Number one, when people open it, they're like, oh my God, I don't have time to read this whole thing, right? So when people send long emails all the time, you start to train them to not open your emails. Because they're like, I'll get to it later. I don't have time for it, right? But if they know it's quick, they're like, okay, I'll open it. But the other thing is, when they go to it to read it on your website, let's say if it was a blog post, right? They're in your world. They're more likely to share it on social or elsewhere. Can't share an email on social. Not really, not easily, right? You on the back end can see exactly how many people and who clicked it and actually read it. Whereas if you have the full copy of the article in there, you have no idea. All you know is they opened it, maybe. You don't really know if they read it or not. So I think especially again, if you're doing longer form or deeper content or whatever, I think it's just as important to do it this way, because you get all those other fringe benefits that you wouldn't get, if you just put it in there. So I wouldn't worry about the depth, because the person that does it isn't going to judge you on that. They're going to judge you on the piece of content that you sent to. And that's the bigger point, whether it's your stuff or anything, right? A micro newsletter is a really valuable tool and it's a great format, but it only works if you send them to good stuff.
Yeah.
So if you send them to stuff that's not valuable, and I could write the best tease content, whatever, I could get every single person to click. But if what I send them to doesn't live up to what I said, they feel deceived and they're not going to click again. So the most important part still, I'm not saying do this and don't create deep content. I'm saying do this as a way to get more people to see your deep content.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Okay. Yeah, I had a bit of a block on it. So yeah, that makes total sense. So thank you.
And if they click a link and you send them wherever and they find that valuable, they're not going to be mad at you. They're going to be thrilled and they're going to want the next one.
Okay. Okay. Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank
you're
you.
welcome.
All right. Priska has a question if she wants to come off mute.
Yes. So I had
Press.
things. Tagging, because I'm assuming that's what you're using to be able to figure out who you're remarketing to.
Yeah, I mean, it's automatically done in ConvertKit. You can see who clicked what, but yes. I don't have to
Okay.
actually set a tag, but that is another way to do it. Yeah.
Okay. Alrighty. And now I was gonna ask you how many tags you have, because it sounds like there's a whole bunch of stuff going on, but
Yeah.
seems like you do it a little bit differently. Okay.
Yeah.
And then when people sign up for your list, did you have that long form and you have
Mhm.
are they two separate things still now, or are they?
No, so they're one now, right? So people
Okay.
sign up, and in my welcome email, I think I say to them, here's what, you're going to get a 1 paragraph daily email or 1 paragraph email on weekdays, and then a longer email on Sundays. And I allow people to opt out. Most people don't. And by the way, like, again, this daily is a whole other thing, right? Like, so there are some people that are not going to want a daily email, and it's just not for them. Like, that's a choice that I have made. You don't have to do. I'm not saying that anyone has to do daily, right? I think even if you just did weekly, this can be a stronger format. Again, it's easier. It's, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, but there's some people that I don't want a daily email. That's okay. Like I've chosen to make the trade-off that I'd rather have the stronger connection to the people that want it daily than sort of go weekly. So, and again, it came out of the sort of experiment side project. Like, it just sort of evolved that way. And I was like, wow, the feedback on this is really good. And it seems like it's working. And so, but yeah, you certainly don't have to go daily.
And then lastly, when you said you put the first one is the promo of your content, do you ever put, I feel like I kind of really answered this, but I've been on the newsletter, but do you ever put stuff like your paid offers there, or is it just, you're always putting like in the middle as you're your own sponsor?
No, I'll oftentimes do that. Right. Yeah. So yeah, it doesn't, I don't think of, I put whatever I most want people to, and on that given day, it's like, what's going there is the thing. I know it's the thing they're going to read first. And like, this is the thing that I most want them to see or check out, which is usually my stuff. Sometimes it's a promotional thing. Sometimes, most times it's a piece of content or something like that.
Oh, thanks.
Cool. Thank you.
All right, we're going to go over to Carolyn's question. And Carolyn wants to attract 2 different audiences. Is there a better platform that keeps her work on the same place? Carolyn, if you want to jump on off of mute.
You there, Carolyn? Did we lose her?
No, I think she's here, but it's on mute.
Oh, Carolyn, you don't have to come on mute off mute if you don't want to, but if you do want to explain it a little more, you're certainly welcome to. I think you're asking, when you say place, is she meaning platform, like ConvertKit or platform? Read me the question again.
I want to attract 2 different audiences. Is there a better platform that keeps my work on the same place?
I think I'm a little confused.
Yeah. We can jump
We'll
to the
circle
next.
back.
We'll
And
circle
Carolyn,
back.
you can also email me if you want. We can do it that way too.
Yeah. We'll circle back. Going over to Rob's question, how do you decide what's on your sign-up welcome sequence versus broadcast emails? Which new signups miss out on?
My welcome sequence is like real. I don't have a big extended welcome sequence. So they basically get a welcome email. There's a question in it. If they answer it, they'll reply back, and then I'll reply back to them. The only thing that's automated really is just a one email sequence. So there's nothing that complicated. Yeah. So that just keeps it simple.
Cool. Next up is Brendan's question. Do you ever do a series of tiny posts, like a training course style set of posts? Are there things to think about or avoid?
When you say post, is this related to the micro newsletter, or is this a sort of separate question?
It's actually a micro newsletter. You had another concept where you create like a little series of, it's almost like
like a pop-up newsletter? Is that what you
yes,
mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so what did you want to know about that?
Can you do the same thing with this within these little mini
Yeah.
newsletters? And is there anything in particular to think about?
Yeah. I mean, again, this is another thing that I've thought about and have not actually done, but I've done this I have so much stuff that I've shared, and new people coming in don't see it. And like, there's archives, but they're not going to go back. So I've actually thought about the idea. This ties into the other question too. I've thought about the idea of like, okay, well, let's say I have a lot of people in my audience who want, who are really interested in newsletter growth specifically, right? So I could take all the stuff I've shared about newsletter growth over the years, create an automated evergreen newsletter one. And when people sign up, say, hey, I've got this other thing. Do you want this? It's a 30-day, it's a 60-day, it's a whatever. And it's going to format, but only sort of greatest hits of newsletter growth stuff. I haven't done it yet. I like the idea. I just haven't done it. I definitely think it could work. I also think like when I was thinking about it, my other idea was like, I could do that and just get one sponsor and basically say like, you can sponsor this whole sequence, you pay X amount for the year or whatever. And anyone that comes in and goes through it, you get it. So if I did it, that would probably be the way to do it. It's like a lot of things, right? It's like, it wouldn't actually be that hard or take me that much time to set up. I just haven't gotten around to doing it. And the chances are, I think it would probably work pretty well. And if it did, I could have one on newsletters and I could have one on, podcast growth and one on whatever. So I like the idea. I just haven't done it.
Yeah, because it complements this whole attention span problem that we all have.
Yep.
And so the idea of something really drip, drip, drip,
Yep.
I think that's, okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, the short answer is I should do it. I just haven't done it. So yeah, cool. Thanks for the question.
You bet.
Okay, we've got clarification on Carolyn's question.
Okay.
She goes, I want to do a newsletter for men and one for women. Is there a platform that I can keep both newsletters on the same platform as opposed to going from one platform to another?
Yes. So I think when you're saying platform, I assume you're meaning like email service provider, whatever. So you can do that. So for example, again, I use ConvertKit. I'm sure you can, Emily, I think you could do it in MailChimp. I think you could, right? You would just basically you'd have one account, but you'd sort of have two separate lists. Again, depending on the platform, how they do tagging or whatever, you would essentially say like people that sign up through this form get this tag, people that sign up through this form get this tag. And then the emails, you have different emails going to the people on different tags. So that probably sounds more complicated than I mean it, but you should be able to do it. I don't know what platform or email service your provider you're using. You can definitely do it in ConvertKit, and I'm sure you can. I think you can do it in most email providers.
Great. And we have a question from Janice. And Janice says, I like the idea of a hybrid newsletter. If you already have a long form weekly newsletter and want to alternate between long and micro form weekly newsletter, would you announce the change or just do it? Basically, how would you make the transition?
I would announce it. I think what I would probably do is I'm a big fan of announcing things as experiments because then you don't really have to like full on commit and freak people out. So if you send, let's say you send every other week, right? You might say for the next 2 weeks on my off weeks, I'm going to send this new experimental micro newsletter and like, let me know what you think. Right. So you'll be able to see very quickly that way, people aren't going to think, oh, everything's changing. And the truth is it probably should be an experiment at first, right? Because you don't know if you're going to want to keep doing it and you don't know how people are going to like it or respond to it. I know in both cases, you're probably going to like it and they're probably going to like it, but you never know until you do it. So that's what I would do. I would do it I would announce it as a sort of experimental new feature that you're giving people and see how it goes.
Okay, great. If Priska wants to jump back on, she has a follow-up question.
So with the remarketing thing, back to that topic, when you're saying how work on a certain thing, how do you organize that if you're not tagging people? How do you?
So if I tag them if I'm doing some sort of automated remarketing thing, right?
Okay.
In most cases, I'm not. So occasionally I am, but in most cases, I'm not. So in most cases, if I might look at, here's an example. If I do a promo for my group coaching program, I'm probably not setting an automated follow-up in just a regular newsletter. Like I'm probably not setting up an automated follow-up to anyone that clicks this. I want to hit them with like a group coaching promo, whatever. What I'll more likely do is I'm going to go look at who they are. And there might be some that I'm like, oh, that person seems like a really good fit. And I might just reach out to them individually. Like I'm sort of doing it like that. There are times when I do automate it because I want to, and then I do use tags. But a lot of times I'm just sort of anecdotally looking and going like, who are these people and who seems like they would be a good fit and that kind of thing. So yeah, because again, the other thing is because I'm sending so frequently, the reason I usually don't automate it is, let's say 50 people click the link about the group coaching program. Those 50 people are going to get another email from me tomorrow. So if I'm also now automating which I can, but now they're going to get 2 emails from me tomorrow. They're going to get the newsletter and they're going to get this promo. So usually, again, unless I'm really doing a sort of campaign and a launch that I've sort of planned out, Usually I'm much more sort of just looking and seeing like, oh, here's that person that I was chatting with on LinkedIn. They click the thing that, I'm kind of doing it like that. But you're right. If you want to automate it, you would add a tag. You would have to.
The thing I do sort of the same but different, but it works different for yours because you're daily is like I only email mainly Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And so like Tuesday, if those people click, I might send them all the broadcasting on Tuesday.
Yeah.
But like now I am afraid of that stuff.
Yeah, I'm not against doing it. And if I was sending less frequently, I might do it more often. And like I said, when I'm in sort of deliberate like promo mode, like or deliberate, like, I got to launch or something, then I'm way more likely to automate because I'm going to be more aggressive with it. But day to day, yeah, I'm not setting tags every single day or anything like that.
Okay, we've got a question from Obi. Are you batch writing a week at a time or daily?
Ideally or actually? In theory, what I'm doing most week, it's funny because this week I'm not because I was working on a session and got behind on a million different things. So I've been writing it daily, which is not what I typically do. What I typically do is I'll do a week at a time. So what I've actually been doing lately is on Saturday or Sunday, I'll basically I'll do it in 2 steps. I'll map out the week, right? So here's what I'm going to send each day. And then I'll have a second time where I go in and I write all of them for the week. Doesn't take me that long, right? It's 5 emails that are each really short. Takes maybe an hour. So typically I'm working like a week in advance. But once upon a time, like when I first started doing this and was much more on top of it, there were times where I wrote a month in advance. It was 20 emails and it wasn't that hard. I could take a couple hours and have a full month's worth of daily newsletters scheduled. I'm not doing that now. It'd be nice if I was, but I'm not. But yeah, typically a week in advance or a week at a time.
Oh, a follow-up from Toby. Do you send at a certain time of day? Does it matter? Time zones and all?
I send at 6 a.m. Los Angeles time. It doesn't, send time doesn't particularly matter. The way I think about it with all newsletters, not just micro newsletters, is if whatever you're sending isn't time sensitive, I think the big question is your audience more likely to consume it at work or not at work? If it's the kind of thing that they're going to consume at work, then I would send it in the morning. If it's the kind of thing that they're not going to consume, I would send it in the morning on a weekday. The kind of thing they're going to consume not at work, then I would send it on a weekend or in the evening. I've been tempted. I haven't done this, but I've been tempted to shift it to evening delivery. Although my theory behind it was I could post, if I was going to include a social post, if I sent in the evenings, there would be days where I could post something on social that day, that afternoon, and then basically immediately send it in the newsletter, which would then drive people to that social post right after it was posted, which I think would like supercharge it in the algorithm because you get all that engagement immediately after posting. I'm not doing that because then I feel like I'm going to be stuck sort of be tougher to plan ahead. But I do think like if I were doing weekly, like I do think it's an interesting way to supercharge. There was someone that I was reading about who does that, who basically like when they post something big that they want traction with on social, they email it to their list immediately after publishing it. And it works well because they're just driving everyone to this new post, which the algorithm loves. But I'm not doing that.
Cool. There's been some back and forth discussion about, and I have the memory of a goldfish, so I can't remember which episode this was. You remember the podcast episode you did with someone, a LinkedIn guy, talking about the transition to like from long form?
Justin Welsh.
Was that the one?
Talking about, was it someone who was a LinkedIn expert or was me giving them advice?
Toby mentioned it, said
I think it's it's Justin Welsh.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thanks. Thank you. I will find the link to that, everyone, and put it in the chat. Lovely. Question from Sharon, specifically about ConvertKit. I know we talked about it before. Can you have 2 different newsletters in ConvertKit and Kit with totally different audiences? Would that work with tags? And do you have 2 different landing pages? How does that work?
Yeah. Yes, you can. It just has to do with the tags and stuff. Like when I did a pop-up newsletter, I ran it through my same account. I just had them go through. They signed up on a different form. And when they signed up from that form, they got a different tag. And so, yeah, you can do it.
Okay, cool. And then, Rodney has a question. What is a pop-up newsletter?
I talked about it on the podcast as well, but basically the idea of a pop-up newsletter is it's not an ongoing newsletter that goes forever. So you pick a topic and a specific kind of length, So the one I had done, I had actually done for a client who wanted to reach, parents of high school athletes. And so we did a pop-up newsletter called Game Changer that was just literally like on the sign up page. It was like, this is only a 5-issue newsletter. So you're going to get it once a week for 5 weeks. We wrote it. It was all automated and sort of that's it. So it's, again, it plays into the idea that people do like things that they have an ending, that as opposed to signing up for a newsletter that goes on forever and ever and ever. It's another way, it's sort of another delivery system for like a lead magnet or educational email course. He wasn't interested. He didn't need to be writing a newsletter forever. He just needed something that was going to attract his ideal clients. So it could be anything, but that's the basic premise is there's a clear beginning and end, and it's probably automated.
Great. Question from Corey. What was your thinking when you changed from your paid newsletter to the skill session workshop format, and how has it been going?
It's going great. There is a blog post. Let me see if I can find it. I wrote a blog post around that time that was all about, it's gone much better than the paid newsletter went. Yeah, here. This is actually a really, lots of people find this blog post helpful. Basically, most paid newsletters fail because they offer more instead of different. And so I talk through in there sort of the lessons I learned and why I shifted. And I wrote that post a while ago. It says 5 months ago, but it was updated 5 months ago. It was actually written several years ago. But yeah, that'll probably explain what you want to know.
Awesome. Sally had to hop, but she did have a question for you about niche. And what's your take on niching into a race or gender? I have a bit more info that she passed along, but do you want me to read it? It's kind of a lot.
I mean, I think my take is, well, first of all, I also want to just drop again a reminder, the form for anyone that wants to give feedback. Let me know how you like the session, all that stuff, testimonial, whatever. My take on niche is all kind of the same. Like, any niche can be great and any niche can be terrible. Like, I think it's all in the execution, right? So I think, for me to say like, if somebody was like, oh, are Latinos a good niche? Like, yeah, if you want to serve Latinos, like if that's a thing that matters. If it doesn't matter, then why are you niching to it? So I don't think there's a good or bad. I think it just has to do with like it being aligned and strategic to your goals and what you're doing. It's view it as the same thing, any sort of niche category. There's no difference between Latinos or lawyers or moms or what, it's all just sort of picking who you ideally want to serve. I think I saw one more. Oh, did I already answer it? The tracking spreadsheet.
Yeah. It was just
Okay.
where the headline came from, and I just
Gotcha.
answered it. So you're good.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Our next jam session, which will be open Q&A, I believe is December, maybe. I think it's a couple of weeks from now on a Wednesday.
It is.
As always, shoot me an email if you have any other questions, josh@joshspector.com. The recording of this will be available. And I think, Emily, we're going to send the slides and everything again. That's now part of the process. And that's about it. Thanks, everybody.